A lot of questions investors have to ask about this big jump in growth to 4%. Is it here to stay or just a one-off? And how does it affect the central bank and their policy to raise rates gradually? But one question the number definitively answers is this. The negative print we got in the first quarter, cited by so many bears, was unquestionably an aberration. We know that now, likely caused mostly by weather.
Well, it depends on where you are and what political stripe you follow today, for there is either wild celebrations or subdued mumbling as the new job numbers emerge. Add to that what is nothing more than what some call a myth about the gross domestic product. Put your economic thesaurus away, and we will answer all. Had to get that right. It was tough there. Let us all make sense of it. We welcome in Chairman of the Society to Advance Financial Education, Steve Beaman, joins us once again on MidPoint. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Well, it's my great pleasure to be here once again.
Here we go, Steve. 4% the economy grows at annual pace in the second quarter after shrinking at a 2.1% rate in the first 3 months of the year. Okay, America's listening right now. Put that into English.
Well, let me talk about something in finance we call reversion to the mean, meaning that when you get wild swings, it tends to swing back. And after that negative first quarter we saw, there was no question the second quarter would come back a little bit stronger, and indeed it did. But I think it's too early to celebrate. We're still in a very anemic economy. The unemployment numbers, first-time claims came out at about 300,000 this last month, and that's indicative that we still are having very anemic growth.
Is it not fair to say, though, there are many who will come out and say, wait a minute, growth is still sturdy. Everything looks good for the rest of 2014 here, so stop being pessimistic.
Well, I wrote an article recently about what I call the perma bulls and the perma bears, meaning that there are always those people who are looking to say it's always rosy, things are great. And the contrary is true. There are always those saying, hey, it's always bad. It's always bad. There's an agenda behind those statements. I think we need to look to the real numbers and say this year is still showing, again, this anemic growth. We'll probably end up at a 2% growth rate, which, again, better than nothing, but it's not good enough to keep up with population growth and the productivity needs that we have as a nation.
All right, look at you talking about numbers, and here we are right now. On screen, we have the U.S. GDP growth. Slow but steady is what it is called here, ending out at plus 2.4%. All right, so what in realistic now? You're looking at the General Joe Beercan, who's out there right now, looking at these kind of numbers, saying, what does it really mean for me, and what does it really mean overall for the amount of money I bring home? Should I panic? Should I worry? Where does it stand?
Well, clearly, I like to teach people never panic. Always use your rational mind over your emotional self, as hard as that is sometimes. But right now, for the average American, they've got two big concerns. Their current job, most likely, as well as their retirement that's coming down the pike. We have the baby boomers ready to retire in the next many years. And I think for those folks, they need to understand that the risks that are out there right now are, number one, interest rates. To the extent the Federal Reserve overreacts to this seemingly positive, although I would say muted information, that could cause interest rates to spike up, which would hurt the housing market, the construction markets, and indeed slow this back down. The other thing is, to the extent their 401ks are exposed to the bond market, we need to make sure that we don't have long-term debt exposure, meaning that we're buying bonds and income instruments that have very long exposures. As interest rates go up, those values will go down.
One of the things we're talking about at Newsmax.com, and this article is out there, jobs growth disappoints, real unemployment hangs at 18%. Now, the Labor Department says, all right, look, 209,000 jobs were added in July, the unemployment rate, 6.2%. But these numbers, again, we always look at these, and don't you love it how you'll get one side will trumpet them and the other side will have to say it's not a real indicator. You're the guy who can speak from both economic hands now. What's the reality from these two numbers?
I say that numbers are, they're created by the political establishment to sell a point. The real unemployment in this country across the broad section of Americans is about 18%, as you said. The labor participation rate is at the lowest point since the 70s, and that's a very real indicator of how much of our possibly productive population is employed. The numbers that bother me the most, though, are youth unemployment. You go below 25 years old, and it's a 25% unemployment generally, with 50% unemployment in the African-American community. Those numbers are the troubling ones. So they can come out and tout all they want. We saw unemployment at 6.2%, whatever they want to use. The reality is much different for people, and we need to look through those numbers and see the truth for what it is.
Let's kind of look through those numbers a little bit here. You bring up a great point. African-Americans, kids in general, people under 25, there simply are no jobs out there, but specifically in the African-American community. Now we are talking about an immigration crisis here where we have youngsters coming in, and we have people who are of job age who are going to be out looking for jobs eventually. Let's just kind of focus our way down the calendar here a little bit if things happen. there's not enough jobs right here now, Steve, for Americans that are here. What's going to happen to these numbers if there are several 100,000 more people coming in looking for work on top of an economy that doesn't have enough jobs to feed what we have now?
Well, I think you're hitting a really important thing folks need to be aware of. The kids, quote unquote, coming in through the southern border right now are being put out into the country, into local communities that have to put them into their school systems. Now, these kids don't speak English, and many of them don't speak Spanish. So we're going to need to hire interpreters for these kids, and the cost at the local school system level is going to explode. Furthermore, we are not creating the kind of entry-level jobs that we need right now to sustain the population. And things like raising the minimum wage in Chicago, they're talking about doing, only harm that. So we need to have a comprehensive policy to limit unregulated immigration. We can't handle an unlimited number of people, tied together with economic policies that drive job growth at the entry level. And we're just not seeing that right now. In fact, even here in Chicago, some of the inner city community organizers are coming out very much against bringing these immigrants into Chicago because we can't support our own, let alone throwing more problem on top of that.
About the minute or so that I have left, let me throw this globally here. There's so much going on around the world now, so much discourse in various areas, global conflict. American exports, how is that affecting our exports? What is it doing to the overall economy then here?
Well, right now, the American export market has been very strong. The dollar compared to the euro and to the other currencies has been reasonably valued. So we're seeing good exports. That's another dimension of risk here. As the Fed raises interest rates to tighten up the money supply a bit, that will make our currency more valuable. As that happens, our export businesses will be affected because fewer dollars overseas will be able to buy American goods. So there's a real balancing act here the Fed is trying to do, but it all comes back to follow the Fed. I have a very good friend who wrote a book by that title, and it's an absolute truth. Follow the Fed.
20 seconds left. What do you think we're going to see from the Fed coming down the road here? It's always fun to watch.
It's the new sport of the century. I think third quarter, you're not going to see them make any moves whatsoever. In the early fourth quarter, if we see a robust third quarter, which I don't really expect, but if we do, I think you could see them moving rates up at that point as we come toward the year end. But right now, Janet Yellen and the other folks that sit at the Board of Governors are sitting there scratching their heads saying, if we take them up now, we could really kill what may be erroneous growth, and they don't want to do that.
Remember, people, don't panic. It's what Steve Beaman tells us. He'll tell us again next time he shows up here on MidPoint. Steve, always a pleasure, my friend. Be well. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much.
All right, next hour, the handling and or mishandling of the latest failed Middle East ceasefire by John Kerry. That and so much more as MidPoint questions everything.